At 4:32 in the morning on August 3, 2025, the Russian destroyer Admiral Ushakov was sailing in combat formation 18 nautical miles off the coast of Sevastopol when its electronic warfare systems picked up the first anomalous signals. Captain Alexei Morozov immediately ordered Yellow Alert. Over the past 40 days, Russian naval intelligence had intercepted communications, suggesting that Ukraine was developing a new generation of naval drones with capabilities never seen before. What Morozov didn't know was that at that exact moment, less than 3 miles from his position, the most dangerous combat test in the history of modern naval warfare had just begun. Beneath the dark waters of the Black Sea, 6 unmanned submarine vehicles, the size of speedboats, were moving in wolfpack formation toward the Russian fleet. Each one carried 500 kilograms of high explosives and artificial intelligence navigation systems that allowed them to operate without any external communication once activated. The Ukrainian commander responsible for the operation, Naval Colonel Yuri Shevchenko, was watching from an underground bunker in Odessa as coded signals arrived every 30 seconds from the submarine drones. The mission had a simple code name: Silent Storm. The objective was even simpler: sink the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in international waters, using only autonomous drones, without risking a single Ukrainian life. The submarine drones had been launched from a secret position on Snake Island 4 hours earlier. Their maximum underwater speed was 45 knots, 3 times faster than any conventional torpedo, and their acoustic signature was so low they were virtually undetectable to existing sonar systems. But the most lethal innovation of these drones wasn't their speed or stealth. Each unit was equipped with an artificial intelligence system developed in collaboration with Silicon Valley engineers who had previously worked on autonomous vehicle projects for Tesla and Google. The drones could analyze in real time the acoustic, electromagnetic, and thermal characteristics of their targets, identify specific vulnerable points, and coordinate simultaneous attacks without needing to communicate with each other. At 4:47, the sonar operator on the Admiral Ushakov, Petty Officer Dmitry Volkov, detected what he described as intermittent acoustic anomalies in the south-southeast quadrant. The signals appeared and disappeared every few seconds, too irregular to be marine life, too small to be conventional submarines. Morozov ordered a course change 15 degrees to port and activation of active sonar. High-intensity sound waves began sweeping the water in a 5 nautical mile radius. What the captain didn't know was that the Ukrainian drones had been programmed to interpret active sonar as confirmation that they had located their primary target. The 6 drones immediately adjusted their attack formation. The first 2 headed toward the destroyer Admiral Ushakov, the third and fourth toward the frigate Admiral Makarov, sailing 800 meters to starboard. The last 2 toward the supply ship Academic Passion, bringing up the rear of the formation 1,200 meters astern. At 4:53, first visual contact occurred in the most unexpected way. Lookout Pavel Kuznetsov, stationed on the bridge of the Admiral Ushakov, spotted what he described as a very small white wake moving at high speed, approximately 200 meters off the destroyer's bow. Kuznetsov immediately activated the combat alarm. Sirens began wailing across all ships in the Russian formation, and crews ran to their battle stations, but it was already too late. The drones had reached optimal attack distance and had initiated their final approach sequence. The first drone partially emerged from the water 150 meters from the Admiral Ushakov, revealing a matte black hydrodynamic profile that made it almost invisible against the dark waters. Its approach speed was so high that the destroyer's anti-aircraft defense turrets couldn't rotate fast enough to track its trajectory. Morozov screamed the order for free fire, but the close-in defense machine guns fired at empty water. The drone had submerged again and was now approaching directly toward the destroyer's hull below the waterline, invisible to all visual detection systems. At 4:57 and 30 seconds, the first drone impacted the Admiral Ushakov exactly at the point where Ukrainian engineers had calculated it would cause maximum structural damage. The explosion of 500 kilograms of explosives opened an 8-meter diameter breach in the hull, just below the main engine room. Seawater began flooding into the destroyer at a rate of 2,000 liters per second. Damage control systems activated automatically, but the magnitude of the breach exceeded the ship's bilge pump capacity. Morozov immediately ordered emergency maneuvers to try to reduce water intake, but the Admiral Ushakov had begun listing to starboard. Simultaneously, the second drone had adjusted its approach based on data transmitted by the first at the moment of impact. Instead of attacking the hull, it headed for the destroyer's superstructure, specifically targeting the bridge where all communication and navigation systems were concentrated. The drone burst from the water like a missile, reaching a height of 12 meters before slamming into the armored windows of the bridge. The explosion instantly destroyed all electronic equipment in the Admiral Ushakov's command center, leaving the destroyer without communication or coordination capability. But the real masterstroke of the operation was unfolding simultaneously on the other two ships in the Russian formation. The drones assigned to the frigate Admiral Makarov had implemented a completely different tactic. Instead of attacking directly, they positioned themselves on either side of the ship and detonated their explosive charges 50 meters from the hull. The underwater explosions created shockwaves that didn't cause immediate structural damage, but did trigger critical failures in all the frigate's electronic systems due to the electromagnetic effect of the detonations. The Admiral Makarov lost electrical power, communication systems, radar, and propulsion capability. The ship began drifting out of control, while its crew desperately fought to restore basic systems. The two remaining drones executed the most spectacular part of the operation against the supply ship Akademik Pashin. This vessel, loaded with fuel, ammunition, and provisions for the entire fleet, represented the most valuable target from a logistical standpoint. The drones coordinated for a synchronized attack that had been calculated with mathematical precision. The first drone impacted the aviation fuel tanks located in the ship's central section. The initial explosion created a fireball that rose 200 meters above the sea, visible from the Crimean coast. Exactly 3 seconds later, when the Akademik Pashin's automatic fire suppression systems activated, the second drone detonated against the artillery ammunition depot. The secondary explosion was so powerful that the blast wave shattered windows in coastal buildings more than 15 kilometers away. The Akademik Pashin literally split in half. The bow section sank in less than 4 minutes, while the stern, still on fire, remained afloat for 20 more minutes before disappearing beneath the waters. At 5:08, the Russian naval formation had ceased to exist as an operational force. The Admiral Ushakov stayed afloat, but with a 22-degree list that made any combat operations impossible. The Admiral Makarov drifted powerless with all systems down. The Akademik Pashin had sunk completely. Russian human losses were devastating. 73 sailors died on the Admiral Ushakov, mainly in the engine room. 41 on the Admiral Makarov, most from smoke inhalation when ventilation systems failed after the electromagnetic pulse. 122 on the Akademik Pashin, including the entire crew that was on watch in the sections that took direct hits. But the most shocking aspect of the entire operation was that it had been executed without a single Ukrainian unit being present in the combat zone. The drones had operated completely autonomously from launch to final impact. No human operator had controlled the attacks. Artificial intelligence had made all critical tactical decisions. The first Russian rescue ships arrived in the area at 5:45. The frigates Admiral Grigorovich and Admiral Essen, which had departed from Novorossiysk upon receiving the first distress signals, found a scene of total devastation. The Admiral Ushakov was still afloat but being evacuated. Rescue operations were complicated because the ship had lost all electrical power and emergency systems had failed due to salt water entering the main circuits. The Admiral Makarov had managed to restore auxiliary power, but its propulsion systems remained inactive. The ship had to be towed back to port by one of the rescue vessels. Of the Akademik Pashin, only floating debris remained and a fuel slick that spread across several square kilometers. Rescue teams managed to pull 43 survivors from the water, most with severe burns and blast injuries. News of the operation was kept secret for 6 hours. Russian authorities implemented a complete information blackout while they tried to assess the magnitude of the disaster and its strategic implications. It was at 11:15 in the morning when the first commercial satellite images of the area were published by international media. The photographs clearly showed the remains of the academic Pashin sinking, the Admiral Ushakov being towed with a pronounced list, and the Admiral Makarov navigating assisted by rescue ships. The international reaction was immediate. The attack marked the first time in history that a naval operation of this magnitude had been executed exclusively by autonomous unmanned vehicles. The implications for the future of naval warfare were evident to military analysts worldwide. The United States immediately suspended all artificial intelligence technology exports to any country involved in active conflicts. China announced it would accelerate development of its own autonomous naval drones. The United Kingdom convened an emergency session of the UN Security Council to discuss regulation of autonomous weapons in naval conflicts. For Russia, the operational consequences were immediate. The Black Sea Fleet suspended all operations in open waters. Remaining ships were concentrated in heavily defended ports, and new navigation protocols were implemented requiring permanent air escort for any naval movement. The technology used in the operation had been developed in absolute secrecy for 18 months in underground facilities near Dnipropetrovsk. The project had involved Ukrainian engineers, artificial intelligence specialists from Israel, and submarine propulsion technology from Norway. The drones cost approximately $200,000 each, including artificial intelligence development. The total cost of the operation, including research and development, was $8 million. The value of the destroyed Russian ships exceeded $1.5 billion. 3 days after the attack, reconnaissance satellites detected that Russia had begun transferring its main Black Sea naval units to the Baltic Sea. The Russian Black Sea Fleet had effectively ceased to exist as an operational force. The psychological impact on Russian naval crews was as significant as the material damage. The idea that they could be attacked by completely invisible enemies, operating without need for communication or human control, created a level of stress and paranoia that severely affected combat morale. Security camera recordings from the Russian ships, later recovered by salvage teams, showed that the crews had less than 4 minutes between first detection and final impact. Human response time had been completely insufficient to counter the speed of autonomous attacks. Colonel Shevchenko was promoted to brigadier general 1 week after the operation. He received the Order of Bohdan Khmelnytsky First Class, Ukraine's highest military decoration. In his acceptance speech he said only, "The future of naval warfare has arrived. It's no longer about how many ships you have, but how smart they are." The remains of the Admiral Ushakov were later refloated and transferred to a shipyard in Sevastopol, where they remained for months awaiting repairs that were never completed. The cost of rebuilding the destroyer exceeded that of building a new one. The Admiral Makarov returned to active service 3 months later, but with severe operational limitations. Damage to its electronic systems was never completely repaired, and the ship was reassigned to low-intensity coastal patrol missions. The strategic impact of the operation became evident in the following weeks. Russia permanently canceled its plans to establish a new naval base in the Black Sea. Naval supply routes to Crimea were abandoned in favor of land transport, much slower and more vulnerable. Operation Silent Storm had demonstrated that the era of naval supremacy based on large warships had come to an end. The future belonged to whoever could develop the smartest, fastest, and most lethal drones. In the waters where once sailed the most powerful ships of the Russian fleet, now there was only silence, scattered oil, and the certainty that naval warfare would never be the same again. Subscribe if you want to learn about the secret operations that are redefining modern conflicts.